Is 2023 the year of a recession? This is the doom and gloom everybody's been craving. Everyone has been wondering when this economy will finally give out. Well, Warren Buffett's 2022 Letter to Shareholders just came out. And Warren Buffett actually chimed in on the topic of the potential 2023 recession. So we're going to take a look at what he said and see if we can learn from the master himself. The actual context for his discussion around the 2023 recession was within the context specifically of the federal deficit being so big. He was talking a bit more in general about the burden of a bad economy and bad economic conditions. Let's go ahead and read what he said. Though economists, politicians, and many of the public have opinions on the consequences of that huge imbalance, Charlie and I plead ignorance and firmly believe that the near-term economic and market forecasts are worse than useless. Now you might be saying, John, doesn't that have nothing to do with the 2023 recession prediction that you promised me? And then the answer is, no, it has everything to do with it. Everything. What is Warren Buffett's opinion on predictions in general? They're literally worthless. It's not a surprise. Everybody has an opinion, and most people are wrong. Most people have no idea what's going on in the economy, even the professional economists. Even though we treat the people who predict the recessions correctly like gods, a lot of them just get lucky. Now, with that said, it would be a really short piece if I cut it off here. Why don't we just talk about why predicting specifically whether there's a recession in 2023 is so difficult? Why is it specifically so hard to predict a recession right now? I'm going to give you a story about where we're at in the economy, and you're going to see a lot of factors that just don't tell a clean story, where no matter how you try to piece it together, things are just weird. And that's why it's so hard to be correct. Well, let's start with the big overwhelming issue in the economy right now, inflation. This is the monthly CPI report. This tells us what the inflation is in the economy for the past year on a month-by-month basis. There are two lines here. The blue line is what we pay. The Federal Reserve cares just about the red line because this is looking at all items in the economy with the exception of food and energy. Oil prices are very volatile. Food prices are very volatile. The Federal Reserve cannot really influence the weather. It can't influence drought. It can't influence OPEC. So the Federal Reserve has to kind of sit there and say, these are outside of our control. All of the other items in the economy are quite a bit more stable. The Federal Reserve has a lot more control over the prices of those goods. So when the Federal Reserve is trying to decide when to slow down the economy, they're looking at the red line here. The Federal Reserve over the past year kept increasing the interest rate. This is like the brake on the economy. If you slow down the economy, there's less demand for goods, and thereby inflation, which is heavily influenced by demand, will start to subside. Additionally, behind the scenes, the Federal Reserve also brought back quantitative tightening, which is literally removing money out of the economy. If there's less money in the economy, every single dollar is worth more. That's another way to bolster the buying power of the dollar. And if we look at the blue line, it kind of makes sense, right? As the brake is hit, the effects of it start to slowly take effect and eventually start bringing down inflation. That's a clean story. But if we look at what the Fed actually cares about, they have a really messy story. So the Federal Reserve starts increasing the interest rate, and then it eventually takes effect, and then core inflation spikes up anyways. Inflation's like, yeah, I see you hitting the brake, and you know what? I don't care. We're going to increase for August and September. What are you going to do about it, punk? And remember, this is the non-volatile stuff. This isn't oil, this isn't food. Inflation's like, I don't care about what you're doing, Jerome Powell. I'm going to put you in your place. And now it's going back down. Jerome Powell was able to tame it. And all of a sudden, core inflation is slowing off. January started to defy the odds. It's slowing, but it's not slowing as fast as it should be. That momentum that we saw from September to October to November to December isn't there anymore. But you might be saying, John, definitely recession's ahead though, because inflation's high. You have to slow the economy, as you said. The Federal Reserve is going to keep increasing the interest rate, which I agree with, and that will slow the economy. I agree with that. So what's going on with unemployment? After all, we know as you slow down the economy, companies want to create less jobs. They won't want to take on risky projects. It's more expensive to borrow money. All these things slow the economy, which means typically people lose their job. So what's going on with the employment situation? We are at 3.4%, the lowest we've seen since 1969. That doesn't really make any sense. The Federal Reserve's been slamming the brake on the economy, right? They've been slamming the brake on the economy. They're slowing it down. Why are we at low unemployment? We saw giant tech layoffs. We had all these tech companies laying off employee after employee. And while all these US companies are not just laying off US employees, we're still talking about 100,000 jobs plus being cut in 2022. We saw more than 100,000 jobs in the tech industry cut in 2023. It's only been like a month or two. Like, why are we seeing record low unemployment while all these job cuts are going on? That's a great question. The tech industry scaled up heavily during the COVID-19 because while everybody's locked at home, they're going to be using a computer, and that's great for tech companies. This is them dialing it back. But even with their dialing back, we see other sectors actually creating jobs to the point where unemployment's at 3.4%. Even if we want to get fancy here, we can look at something like the civilian participation rate, which is showing how many people are working in the economy right now. If we look at civilian labor force participation rate, if we're going to get fancy here, we could say, look, 1% of workers or 1% of people in the United States that could work don't want to work anymore compared to before COVID. Sure. Then employment, if we factored it in, would be at 4.4%, which is still monstrously low. It also wouldn't change the fact that as the federal interest rates have gone up, unemployment's gone down, which makes no sense. None at all. Zip, nada. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Defies all the odds. Now, what I would say is ahead, there is something we can be pretty confident in, something you can put some faith into, which is the Federal Reserve will keep increasing the interest rate. They have what's known as the dual mandate. The dual mandate has two parts to it. There's something that's very unique for our specific central bank, the Federal Reserve in the United States. In addition to moderating prices, stable prices, keeping interest rates appropriate, the Federal Reserve also has to worry about maximum employment. This does not mean everybody has a job. In a capitalist economy, not everybody will, or else the labor market will be so tight that the wage prices go way too high. If we look over at the dual mandate, though, it tells the Fed, hey, you have to worry about inflation and interest rates alongside employment. And we know they're doing a great job on employment, right? We are at 3.4% unemployment. Thereby, we can feel pretty confident they're going to increase interest rates, and that should slow the economy. But also, it should have increased unemployment last year, 2022, and it didn't. Unemployment's the lowest it's been since 1969. What is the takeaway there from this? Well, I hope, at a minimum, you've at least started to appreciate how difficult it is to predict a recession, specifically whether 2023 will have a recession. But let's go back to Warren Buffett here. In his 2022 Letter to Shareholders, he did mention something that you can use to prepare for bad times ahead. In this piece, he was talking about Berkshire Hathaway, his company, and the fact that they love having cash in treasury bills. As for the future, Berkshire will always hold a boatload of cash in US treasury bills, along with a wide array of businesses. We will also avoid behavior that could result in any uncomfortable cash needs at inconvenient times, including financial panics and unprecedented insurance losses. The latter being mentioned because Berkshire Hathaway owns Geico, a massive insurance company. Warren Buffett is somebody who, even being a billionaire and running a gigantic firm, is worried about having to muster up cash at inconvenient times. You don't want to be selling low. You don't want to be forced to sell low. A disaster for Berkshire Hathaway would be to sell a company during the middle of a recession because they need money to cover an insurance payout or something else going on in the business. That would be devastating. Buffett knows that there's a lot of value in having cash ready to go. So whether you're thinking there's a 2023 recession ahead or not, it is true that someday you'll have bad times ahead, which is why you should learn from Warren Buffett right now and make sure you have an emergency fund. What's interesting about an emergency fund is whether you're looking at a financial order of operations like Dave Ramsey's Baby Steps, or even the personal finances subreddit order of operations in terms of how to build up a successful financial future. Step one on both order of operations is get an emergency fund built. Regardless of whatever your financial order of operations, whether it's either of these two or somebody else's, emergency funds are one of the first steps to finding financial success. If we have bad economic times, you have the highest chance of losing your job, period. If you lose your job, you need to be able to cover your bills, cover your apartment rent or your home mortgage, be able to buy food, etc., so that you have time to find new work. You are literally paying yourself at that point out of your emergency fund in order to find a job. Emergency funds have a lot of other uses as well, like if your car breaks down and you need to quickly cover the cost of it so you can get back up and moving again. Emergency funds are great. Even Warren Buffett pays attention to having cash on hand so he can deal with emergencies with his business. You need to make sure you have cash on hand to deal with the business of you, your one-person business, selling your labor out to the market. And if you aren't self-insuring yourself with an emergency fund, you might be screwed whether we have a recession this year or in the future. Learn from Warren Buffett. You should not be wasting your time on doomsayers and prophets talking about whether 2023 will be a good year or a bad year in the world of finance. Focus on what you can control, like having an emergency fund prepared for bad times ahead. No one knows when the bad times will happen, but I can tell you one thing for sure. Bad times will eventually happen, and you're either prepared or you're not.